Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen is 1. As always, I have my co-conspirators, Jason. Hi, everybody. Linda.
Hey there.
And Lara.
Hi, y'all.
We're really glad that you're joining us here for episode 2. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's getting very cold. The days are short, the nights are long. And so we're doing our very best to adopt an approach of hygge as we try to navigate this dark northern time. We're also really pleased to be in partnership with the Karolinska Institutet. That is one of our collaborations on this new podcast. Now, Lara, you have a great episode for us this week. What are we talking about?
I am excited to have this conversation. So in preparation for this recording, I looked up synonyms for uncertainty, but I only came away with confusion and disorientation.
Boo.
Oh, come on. That's pretty good. Oh, I got more. What do you call a charity for uncertainty? Benefit of the doubt. Oh, come on. That's a good one. That's great. That's great.
This is a new dad joke section of our podcast. I thought John Swedish was pushing it.
No. What do you call an uncertain sandy beach? I'm not sure.
I am leaving this podcast right now. I am not doing this anymore. I'm taking my microphone and going home. I'm
Is
done.
it weird that I know so many bad jokes about uncertainty? Maybe not. I had a real reason for picking this paper, not just to share all the bad dad jokes that I had about uncertainty. One of the reasons that I pick for papers for our discussions is I pick papers that give me a visceral reaction when I read them. And this paper gave me a strong reaction because as I read it, I realized that the way the paper framed uncertainty wasn't aligned with the way I've been thinking about uncertainty. So I wanted to have a conversation, honestly, with the three of you and the whole community about the role of uncertainty and uncertainty tolerance in clinical work. I'm the only non-clinically trained host on the podcast. So from this side of the fence, I can understand uncertainty and why uncertainty tolerance is part of the competencies expected of clinicians. So I get it. But I'm wondering what the role of uncertainty is for clinicians, what function it has, and then what is the function of uncertainty tolerance? Now, I'm not going to give you my thoughts until we get a little deeper in the paper. But that's part of why I chose this piece. Now, this piece is from Medical Education, and it's entitled Improving Uncertainty Tolerance in Medical Students, a Scoping Review. It's written by a team led by Patel, including Hancock, Rogers, and Pollard. And the purpose of the study was divided into 2. First, they wanted to identify the range and type of interventions that have been developed to support uncertainty tolerance in medical students. Fine. To do that, they did a scoping review. Fine. The second part of the purpose is to synthesize reported associations between the interventions and uncertainty tolerance. To do that, they engaged in some deductive coding of the papers using a model of uncertainty created by Hill et al. So that model is the lens they're going to code the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the methods for you and then the results in 2 parts, right? So I'm going to divide them up according to the 2 purposes. But before we go into methods, I wanted to pause and ask you guys for your reflections on this concept of uncertainty, on uncertainty tolerance. What do you think of the premises of this paper? Are you interested in cataloging all of these interventions and the associations between interventions and uncertainty tolerance? Let's go, Jason, Linda, John.
I'm glad you picked me first because I really struggle with this concept, and I'd welcome anybody setting me straight. So uncertainty is just a given in any health professions, especially around diagnosis, but also on other aspects. So on a daily basis, whether you're a novice or a seasoned practitioner, you're dealing with uncertainty. How does that manifest? When I work every day in an emergency department, I see people who order more tests or less tests, who observe the patient longer or shorter, who delay giving therapy or jump to it, who delay referring to another colleague or not. And so all of those things are related to tolerance of uncertainty, I suppose. But what I struggle with is, what problem is this paper solving? I'm just not clear. I'm not sure that tolerance of uncertainty is a competency. So I'd love to hear from others about how you conceptualize this.
I absolutely agree with you, Jason, and those are very good examples. And I think we 3 clinicians are in context where uncertainty is bound to be there, because we're often seeing people either early in their presentation or I'm often seeing people with very complex presentations that don't, quote unquote, fit into one thing. The reason I think it's important is that I see particularly probably mid-level learners, junior residents, junior doctors, that sort of thing, who are almost paralyzed because they don't have a right answer, because there is no right answer because of uncertainty. And they haven't learned how to move beyond that and deal with the problem at hand. I got to say, though, that I thought of a few other things as I was reading the introduction here. One is, do people with poor uncertainty tolerance choose different specialties or different professions? I'd love to know about that. The second thing is, does uncertainty tolerance increase with training, or is it innate, or can you start a little bit higher and then go up? And if it is innate, should we be selecting for uncertainty tolerance? So those were three questions that came up as I was reading this, but I do think it's an important issue.
I appreciate everything you said so far, and in some way, I agree with both of you, Jason and Linda. I have a slightly different take. So I think there's a selection pressure or a selection bias. So as an emergency physician, I probably have a higher degree of tolerance for uncertainty than to a subspecialty where the interventions can be so cataclysmic if inappropriately applied that there needs to be greater fidelity and greater degrees of certainty before you proceed in any kind of management process. So I don't think it's relative only to discipline or to individual characteristics. I think it's more importantly a feature of experience. And so this is how I think about it a little bit, that we have people entering into undergraduate streams for health professions, and they come in with an understanding of science as being a black and white. That science, which is the undergirding way of organizing and structuring health professions education, assumes that there's a black and white answer. In fact, as you become farther along in your own education research career or in your own trajectory as a scholar, you'll see that science just gives you better explanations that then need to subsequently be refined, and the field is always advancing and always changing, and that there's not black and white. There is many ways of interpreting very nuanced and complex and sometimes chaotic data. The other piece I would translate that into clinical practice is that early in our careers, the idea of an algorithm, which requires a yes-no decision, moving through some tree, is the way that we approach and take a very complex world and make it manageable for the novice. But when you become an experienced provider, all these algorithms fall away. And it's very clear from the naturalistic reasoning of giants such as Gary Klein and others that show this is not how experienced providers think. That there is not a black and white, there's not a tree approach. And that very much is a function of experience. And so for me, when I think of uncertainty, I think not specialty to specialty or individual to individual, but I think of it novice to expert.
So, John, what you don't know as you were talking, because I know it's hard for you to see other things as you're talking, but that Jason and Linda are dying to jump in. So, Jason, why don't you go first?
Oh, now you said that, I laughed and I totally forgot what I was going to say. Linda, you go.
I agree with you. In fact, I think I said, does uncertainty tolerance develop with expertise? I think it does. There's one thing we've left out of this, and that is, what does the patient want? If you're a patient as opposed to a provider, you want your provider to be certain. And very often we take what's best, but it's not 100%. And that drives some patients crazy.
Jason, did you remember which one?
I do, actually. Thank you for being patient. I agree with what Linda just said, which is about patients sometimes wanting a definite answer. But I think mostly what they want is somebody who's dedicated to them, doing their best. So I remembered what I wanted to say, and this is actually important. When John was speaking, all of that was resonating, which is odd, but it's true. It was resonating with me. I worry that this concept, finding undergraduate health professional students and then having an intervention because of their uncertainty intolerance, is a little bit like a resilience workshop. Like, you better be more resilient. And I worry about that a little bit, but it may be because I'm struggling with how to articulate this concept. The mental model is just not clear to me.
So with all of that said, why don't we jump into methods? And I'm going to be relatively short here because the methods that they followed for the scoping review are pretty textbook. The authors conducted a scoping review and they followed the processes laid out by Arksy and O'Malley and updated by Levac. And they also followed the PRISMA guidelines extension for scoping reviews to guide the writing up. What we'll do is we'll add links to all three of those documents in the show notes. So if you should decide that you're going to take on the challenge of doing a scoping review, you can easily access the right papers for guiding the work, and those are three of the right resources you should rely on. And yes, these authors use the literature and follow the 6 steps of the scoping process. They, number 1, identified the research question. 2, identified relevant studies. Now, just as an aside, they use Medline, PsycInfo, Embase, and ERIC. 3, they selected studies. 4, they charted the data. 5, collated, summarized, and reported the results. And 6, undertook a consultation. So the process is really quite straightforward. But there was one place that gave me cause for pause, and that was the group of people they selected to consult about the findings. So part of a scoping review process is to bring your findings and analysis to a group of people who can offer informed or a special way or some important insights into the analysis. This is a group of people who are uniquely positioned to help you know if something's missing, if there are perspectives you need to take into account, or they might offer some advice that is meaningful to the interpretation of the findings. And in this study, the paper says that 2 members of the author team met with a medical student, a medical educator, and a clinician. And that's all I know about the people consulted. I don't know why these particular individuals have an important perspective to uncertainty and uncertainty tolerance. So maybe you guys had maybe this didn't resonate with you. Maybe that was something you were concerned of. Maybe there was other things that you noted in the methods that we'd like to highlight. Let's go, John, Jason, Linda.
First, I'm going to double click with Jason's comment, which is I'm not sure this is the right target audience. The novice undergraduate medical student, by definition, comes with uncertainty, is a function of a lack of experience. And so it's not understanding the nuance of what a diagnosis or a management plan or an environment entails. It's that they don't know how to navigate it because they just don't have the experience. The second part, I think I want to just fanboy for a second and say Danielle Levac is one of the cited references. And I knew Danielle when she was in training in physiotherapy school and I was in medical school. So I bet you we were both simultaneously very uncertain as to what was happening. But every time we reference her, I think I need to give a shout out to Danielle because it's amazing to see somebody you knew back then who's a big giant in the field now. And third, just as I don't know, this is my little pet peeve. I'm going to get up on my soapbox. It's my first soapbox on the Papers podcast, which is we keep quoting Arksy and O'Malley, who were first past the post, but there's a PRISMA extension now. And I wonder if we should use more of the consensus criteria, which are unchanged and undifferent than what Arksy and O'Malley have, but there's a PRISMA extension. And so that would be maybe the de facto reference moving forward. But with all the scoping reviews we see in the literature, here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I know you want to jump in.
Oh, I dime to, yeah.
But go ahead in a second. Beyond that, I think the methods really make sense and hold true in terms of how they do their literature search. I share a concern for you as to when they try to consult with a potential user group. It doesn't make sense. It seems almost like a non sequitur, but I'm just not sure if it's the right question. I really think that medical students might be the wrong population. But having said that, there's 24 papers in the literature that make it into their study. So other people are thinking about it.
So Jason, Linda, why don't you guys go first? Because I'm going to come back to one of John's points, but I can wait.
You have to look it up, or is that your...
Oh, I can go right now if you want, sweetie. Don't push me. Jason, I'm going to be very polite. Please, after you.
It's always the first time. I have nothing to add about the... I'm just joking. I'm joking. I have nothing to add about the methods. The methods are classic until we get to that commercial of the student, the educator, and the clinician walk in a bar. Like that lost me. Otherwise, the methods are straight up.
I agree with that consultation part. The only other part that bothered me a little bit was this idea of a supplementary search. Well, it's clear that when you're doing a scoping review, you want to get all the articles you can. So I think it's important to search not only the peer-reviewed literature, but the hand-searched key journals, there's a lot of journals to hand-search, contacted corresponding authors, and asked them if they were aware of any other articles. I guess that's okay. It's being thorough. I'd be very interested to hear how many more they got from that supplementary search. Other than that, I'm in violent agreement with John and Jason.
So I agree. The way in which they did all the additional hand searching, I thought that was quite impressive. Now, what I'm going to come back to, John, is that you're wrong about just using the PRISMA guidelines, because PRISMA actually stands for Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analyses. And this is the extension for scoping reviews. And here's the problem with that. Systematic reviews work from a post-positivist orientation, and scoping reviews, as written about by Aliki Thomas et al., scoping reviews work from a constructivist or an interpretivist orientation. So there's subjectivity in the interpretation of the data and the write-up. So to say that the PRISMA guidelines should become the guidelines is to misunderstand. Oh, yeah, I did that, dropped it. The epistemological roots of these approaches. Any comments, John? Oh, please, Linda, go ahead. Pile on. Feel free. No, Linda's going to pile on first. She put up her finger. Yeah.
This is a relatively new podcast, so because we're now on episode 2. And you're using big words, and many of our previous followers will know what they mean. But at some point, I think you're going to have to explain those big words, epistemological, post-positive, and positivist.
Good point. Maybe what we can do is I'll add a little methods consult into our list of episodes forthcoming, and I can go through some of that philosophy of science stuff. John, you wanted to make an additional comment. I'm not sure you still feel the need, but I'm here to support.
I'll keep it short, because the people who are running at this point are exhausted, or people who are driving have an overwhelming desire to maybe crash their car just to make this podcast go away. Which is to say, I'm so pleased that our running argument about the philosophical stance of scoping reviews, whether it comes from a positivist or a subjectivist orientation, persists from our old podcast to the new one, and I'm willing to continue to have that fight.
It's not a fight. I'm right.
Okay. So anyway.
So, well, for another day, you'll hear about my little methods consult about why you're wrong in the future.
Moving on. All right, dear listeners, what we're going to do now is I'm going to do what I usually do, and I'm going to combine results and discussion into one, because they often speak to each other so closely. So I'm going to share the results in 2 parts. First, and that those 2 parts are in relationship to the 2 different purposes of the study. So the first purpose was to assess the nature and extent of the literature available to identify the range of undergraduate medical education interventions that have been developed, and evaluate their impact on uncertainty tolerance. So the authors first search identified 1,384 papers. That's after duplicates have been removed. So that's a pretty sizable corpus. Once that corpus was screened against the inclusion-exclusion criteria, only 53 remained. They did full review, and during that process, another 29 came out, and this left them with a corpus of 24 manuscripts for analysis. Fine. In terms of characteristics of these 24 studies, talk about the kitchen sink of interventions, because everything is in there. This is like the pizza deluxe supreme, with every topping on the menu. So some interventions had 12 participants, others had 900. Some studied a single-year cohort, others studied a mixture of years. Some were done at a single point in time, others were held across various times in the undergraduate training. Some were mandatory, some were voluntary. They used PBL, simulated learnings, humanities training, reflection, assessment. Like literally, the one thing I can tell you about these 24 interventions is that none of them are the same. No 2 are alike. But that's fine. That's really not that surprising, I don't think. Now, we get to the second purpose of this study, which was to map the interventions to Hillen's conceptual framework of uncertainty tolerance. Now, to understand that, I have to give you a little bit of background about this model. In 2017, team of 5 researchers from Portland and Amsterdam, led by Hillen, set out to do 2 things. Hold on, I gotta get the kids up here. Guys, can somebody let the dog out? I need you to come out. She's got to go outside.
It does beg the question, who let the dog out?
Boom, you beat me to it.
Somebody please come up here. Sorry, and we're back. Okay. In 2017, a team of 5 researchers from Portland and Amsterdam, led by Hillen, set out to do 2 things. 1, analyze the meaning of uncertainty tolerance as conceptualized by developers of uncertainty tolerance measures. And 2, develop an integrative conceptual model to guide future empirical research regarding the nature, causes, and effects of uncertainty tolerance, which they did. Good on Hillen et al. But there's something really important to note here because of what it does to the study we're looking at. When they developed this model, to build the model, those authors analyzed the meaning of uncertainty tolerance as it was presented by the developers of uncertainty tolerance measures. So the whole evidence base behind the model they created was all about measuring uncertainty tolerance. It was completely based on the items that existed in measurement scales. So what does that mean? It means that the aspects of uncertainty tolerance that are quantifiable were included. But if an aspect of UT was not quantifiable, then it wasn't part of the measures, it wasn't conceptualized, and that shapes the model they developed, right? It's developed based on what it can be measured and not other aspects of UT. And this makes a lot of sense when you look at the authors on that paper. They were 2 authors on that Hillen paper were from a Department of Medical Psychology in Amsterdam, and 2 worked for the Center for Outcomes Research Evaluation in Portland. So the model is deeply informed by psychological perspectives and evaluation research. And that's fine. For the model they developed, that makes a lot of sense. But it does come with consequences. It means that the model they generated is focused on the individual who experiences uncertainty and on that person's reaction. So when it comes to the results of this study, when we apply that model to the data of this study, we find that of the 22 of the 24 studies demonstrated a positive impact on medical student uncertainty tolerance. And they also talk about there was some negative response to the educational domain. So there was some negative responses, but that all of them had this positive influence on uncertainty tolerance, and positive means that uncertainty decreased, that they could tolerate more of it. So with that said, I'm really interested in what you guys think about this. Does this resonate with your understanding of uncertainty tolerance and what we want to be teaching at the undergraduate medical education level? Let's go, Linda, Jason, John.
So, from what I understand, they talk about the reactions to uncertainty, which can be cognitive, emotional, or behavioral, and can be either positive or negative. And they seem to accept that any influence, either positive or negative in any of those areas, was a change. But I just think it's a lot more complex than that. You can feel uncertain, you're emotionally upset about it, but you're still able to behave in a positive way, for instance.
Yeah, still struggling with this. Still feel that I'm not sure that this is the right approach to this whole concept. So I just want to put that out there. Still struggling with this. Still feels like resilience, like the beatings will continue until resilience improves. So I'm not sure how these interventions actually made these health professionals any better. What we really want to see is a colleague side by side with us who is making the right decision at the right time using the best possible data available. It's always going to be messy. So they have to be able to function. And that's what we really care about, I think.
I think if I was going to take the punchline from how you articulated the Hillen's framework, and as that is the way to organize the literature, is something like this. If uncertainty tolerance is counted in a forest, does anyone even hear it? And it's a great point, which is to say, for something complex about how you might acquire greater comfort with uncertainty, looking for ones and zeros or yeses or nos or correct answer or incorrect answer, the phenomenon is poorly aligned with the actual measure. And I agree, and I would double click your critique there. The part that's striking for me with those rare exceptions of the single intervention leading to a negative valence of the outcome, which is I felt even more uncertain after this intervention that's supposed to bootstrap me to feel more confident with uncertainty. Every intervention of the 29 works, and they're all over the map. From we went to we discussed art, to I went to a lecture, to there was 20 of us, to there was 900 of us. And when everything skews positive, I wonder about two things. Is there a publication bias? Is the literature not reporting the failed trials? And that's a reasonable interpretation. Or second, is this a self-report bias? Because that's really where most of the data is coming from. And so anybody who sits through whatever it is, one lecture, one art critique, or one simulation session, we know the phenomenon, which is we tell ourselves that was worth it, and I feel better. I don't believe these are the interventions to help you deal with complexity in the clinical environment. I don't think these are the interventions to help you understand probability and why a test or a treatment is not good or bad. I think what is needed is experience and that acquisition of further knowledge, and that knowledge happens with experience. And so I'm not going to go change my practice and say, my goodness, I'm going to find table 1 and choose all those interventions and bake them into my curriculum.
Jon, I think you're overlooking EFL, the equine facilitated learning method that was in the list. Like, who didn't go look that up? That was so awesome. Okay, so you get to play with horses. Is that what it is?
And now I'm less uncertain. Either way.
Yeah, exactly.
The takeaway for me for this study is a couple of things. One is that this study is a really clear illustration that the selection of theory you make for your study really shapes the kind of therefore statements, the knowledge you develop afterwards. The theory used in this paper is based on the premise that reducing uncertainty is a sign of better or improved tolerance of uncertainty. And it's a very quantitative way of conceptualizing uncertainty. And that's fine. That's one way of thinking of it. Part of the reason I think I had such a visceral reaction to this paper, you all started to comment on it, is that I just don't think of uncertainty that way. Having recently read a lot of John Ilgen's work looking at uncertainty in practice, he frames it in terms of adaptive expertise and talks about how when you become uncertain, when you have experience, this is a moment when you know that something is going on, that there's a challenge here. It's a moment when you should slow down, revisit, rethink. So uncertainty isn't a negative. It's actually something we should be harnessing for specific purposes to signal to us that something's going on that we need to attend to. That's what I took away from this paper. So it's now time for us to move to our ever dubious scoring structures, which I will entertain because it has tradition. It's
episode 2. There's no tradition yet.
So can we do away with the? Will
No,
you let me do away?
no,
Yeah. See,
no,
there's
no.
I knew I'd have a result. Yeah.
Because it has value.
Emotional value for Jason is why we're going to have the scoring.
And thousands of, one podcast listener also.
Yep, right. There you go. So let's start with methods. 1 to 5. What did you think of the methods of the paper? Never mind the outcomes. Let's go Linda, Jon, and then Jason.
4.
I was going to give it a 3 for some of the critique of the model, but then I looked at was it 1,200 papers they had to screen? As somebody who has recently finished a systematic review and had to screen 700, my heart ached for them. And so I just want to give them a sympathy vote and bump them up to 4. They put in the rigor to try to get it best, and they made some design decisions. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but the methods, they're solid. If you want to see how to do a scoping review, come read this paper and we'll get you through that part of it. You can disagree with how they do the way to aggregate the data, but I give it a 4.
For the same reasons, I give it a 3.
And I'm going to give it a 3.25. Now, moving on
You're pushing my buttons, Varpio. Pushing my buttons.
Moving on now to educational impact. Again, same scale, 1 to 5. This time, let's go Jason, Linda, Jon.
So one aspect of educational impact, since this is a highly validated scale, is whether or not you would use it to generate a discussion, whether or not it would change your practice. This doesn't change my practice, but I would definitely use this to generate a discussion. As I've said all the way through this episode, I struggle with this construct. I worry about these interventions. So I think this is probably a 2. Doesn't change my practice.
So I'll agree. It doesn't change my practice. And I had trouble understanding a lot of the model, particularly in the second part, not in the actual scoping. And I don't think I would give it to somebody to look for methodology. But if I were thinking about uncertainty, I'd go to the adaptive expertise literature, or I'd go to look at something else about uncertainty first. So I too will give it a 2.5.
I wrestled. I wanted to say 1, mostly because I want to be the first person to use the extremes of the scale. But I think it's being unfair to the authors. They're summarizing the literature, which is the point of a scoping review. And you can't blame the authors when the literature is a hot mess, is the actual technical term here. It's like when you said it's a little heterogeneous, I think it's a hot mess is the actual better description, and it's much more accurate. I don't know what to make of this. And because I can't make of it, I can't believe the results and want to implement it in any way. You already heard my bias that I think it's more around the acquisition of experience and filling in knowledge gaps rather than some intervention to make you think, hey, the world might be complex, and I'm not sure if a single intervention helps you deal with that. I don't believe the phenomenon happening. So a 1 in terms of what to do with it, a 2 in the sense of if you want to know what the uncertainty literature looks like, they've tidied it up quite nicely here. And so it gets a 2 for me.
So I'm going to shock all of you, and I'm going to give it a 4.
What?
And here's why. No. So you guys are thinking
did not
of
see
this.
that coming.
No, you did not see this coming. I'm stealthy that way. I
Boom.
am. I'm the ninja of the scale. But the point is, you guys are thinking about whether this paper will change your clinical practice or your educational practice. I'm thinking about, does this paper provide me an opportunity to illustrate how to use theory in an analysis of a scoping review, or how to use it deductively? It's a gorgeous example. They used a very clear theory. They chose it for good reason. It just does things to the analysis that for me don't resonate. But it's a really excellent example of how you turn theory into a lens through which to then analyze data sets. So for me, for that, it's a 4. And with that, dear listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 2 of the brand new, ever fancy Papers podcast. We're so happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to sharing every week some new recordings, some new insights, and a little bit of levity into your life. So with that said, please reach out to us on the Twitter or on our Papers podcast website, email address. We are looking forward to our conversation. And so with that, I'll say, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sorrow. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.